Hello fellow gardeners and soil enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Humus Heritage, where we dig deep into the practices that truly transform our gardens from the ground up. Today, we're exploring something that might just revolutionize the way you think about soil health. Imagine unlocking a hidden superpower for your garden, something so simple yet so profoundly effective it's almost unbelievable. For years, gardeners have overlooked this humble material, but today we're pulling back the curtain on composted pine bark. Prepare to be amazed by the surprising benefits and remarkable results this so-called best-kept secret can bring to your soil health. Walk into any garden center and you'll see bags of pine bark stacked in the mulch section, often passed over for flashier options like decorative stone or dyed wood chips. This is where the story of one of gardening's most underappreciated amendments begins. Pine bark starts its journey as a byproduct of the timber industry, the outer protective layer stripped from logs during lumber processing. What many gardeners fail to realize is that this humble material, when properly composted, becomes something far more valuable than mere mulch. The reason for this oversight is simple. We've been conditioned to think of pine bark as a cosmetic addition rather than a fundamental soil improver. Traditional gardening wisdom often directs us toward compost, peat moss, or manufactured amendments, while pine bark sits quietly on the sidelines. Yet gardeners who've discovered its true potential report transformations that border on miraculous. Heavy clay soils that once turned to concrete in summer suddenly become workable and friable. Sandy soils that couldn't hold moisture begin retaining water like never before. Plants that struggled for years suddenly thrive with vigor that leaves their owners wondering what changed. To understand why composted pine bark works so extraordinarily well, we need to look at its unique physical and chemical properties. The structure of pine bark, even after composting, retains a somewhat coarse, chunky character with varying particle sizes. This isn't a flaw, it's precisely what makes it so valuable. When mixed into soil, these particles create countless tiny pathways and pockets throughout the root zone. Think of it as installing a three-dimensional network of air channels and water reservoirs right where your plants need them most. Heavy clay soils, which typically suffocate roots through compaction and poor drainage, suddenly gain the breathing room they desperately need. The bark particles physically wedge themselves between clay platelets, preventing them from sealing together into that rock-hard mass we all dread. Meanwhile, in sandy soils that drain too quickly, those same bark particles act as tiny sponges, catching and holding moisture that would otherwise wash straight through. The nutrient story with composted pine bark is equally fascinating, though it works on a different timeline than conventional fertilizers. As the bark slowly decomposes over the course of 1 to 3 years, it releases a steady stream of nutrients into the surrounding soil. This isn't the quick hit you get from synthetic fertilizers. It's a sustained release system that feeds your plants consistently throughout the growing season. Even more importantly, as the bark breaks down, it becomes food for the vast underground community of beneficial microorganisms that make soil truly alive. The slightly acidic nature of pine bark, with a pH typically ranging from 5 to 6, makes it particularly valuable for gardeners growing acid-loving plants like blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, and camellias. In regions where soil tends toward alkalinity, pine bark becomes an essential tool for creating the growing conditions these plants require. The disease suppression benefits shouldn't be overlooked either. Research has shown that the composting process encourages beneficial microorganisms that actively compete with and suppress harmful pathogens in the soil, giving your plants a natural defense system right at their roots. Understanding how to apply composted pine bark properly makes the difference between disappointing results and the remarkable transformations we've been discussing. The first decision you'll face is whether to use it as a surface mulch, a soil amendment mixed into the root zone, or both. As a mulch, spread composted pine bark in a layer 2 to 4 inches thick across your garden beds after removing existing weeds and debris. This creates an effective barrier that blocks sunlight from reaching weed seeds, while moderating soil temperature and conserving moisture. The key detail many gardeners miss is leaving a few inches of space around plant stems and tree trunks. Piling mulch directly against woody stems creates a constantly moist environment that invites rot and disease. When incorporating pine bark as a soil amendment, the approach differs depending on your soil type and what you're planting. For heavy clay soils that need structure improvement, work composted pine bark into the top 6 to 8 inches, at roughly a ratio of 1 part bark to 3 parts existing soil. This sounds like a lot, and it is, but the transformation you'll see justifies the effort. For sandy soils, needing moisture retention, the same ratio applies, but the benefits manifest differently. The bark particles catch and hold water that would otherwise drain away, while still maintaining the good drainage that sandy soils naturally provide. The question of DIY composting versus store-bought product deserves careful consideration. Fresh pine bark contains compounds that can temporarily tie up nitrogen as it decomposes, potentially starving your plants. This is why the composting step is absolutely crucial. Properly composted pine bark has already gone through this initial breakdown phase, making it safe and beneficial for immediate use. If you have access to fresh pine bark and want to compost it yourself, pile it at least 3 feet high and wide, keep it moist, and turn it every few weeks. The process typically takes 6 months to a year, and you'll know it's ready when it's dark, crumbly, and has an earthy smell rather than the sharp resinous scent of fresh bark. For most gardeners, purchasing bags or bulk loads of already composted pine bark saves considerable time and ensures you're getting material that's ready to use. Let's talk practicality, because even the most effective amendment needs to make sense economically. Composted pine bark sits in a sweet spot where effectiveness meets affordability. Compared to peat moss, which has become expensive and raises environmental concerns about bog destruction, pine bark costs considerably less and comes from a renewable source. The real question isn't whether composted pine bark works. The evidence from both research and practical experience confirms it does. The question is whether you're ready to implement this game changer in your own garden. Start with a small test area if you're uncertain. Pick a struggling bed or a new planting project and give it the full pine bark treatment. Watch how the soil responds over the coming months. Notice how much easier it becomes to work with, how plants establish more quickly, and how moisture management improves. So, here's my challenge to you. Give composted pine bark a serious try this growing season. Document your results with photos and notes. If you found this guide valuable, please subscribe to the Humus Heritage channel so you never miss our deep dives into the practices that create truly exceptional gardens. Share this video with fellow gardeners who are ready to transform their soil from the ground up. Together, we're building a community that understands real soil health isn't about quick fixes. It's about working with nature's own systems to create gardens that thrive for years to come. Until next time, keep digging deeper and growing better.